Again, it's obviously in a continuum of what we've discussed. Okay, maybe to get into things here, we'll say there's the first sentence here in chapter 2 is first of all, it's a very famous sentence, maybe one of the most famous sentences in Tanya. "Benefesh hashenit b'Yisrael היא חלק אלוקא ממש." That and it starts with a ve. Many stories on how much the Alter Rebbe, how much concentration he put into every vav he put in Tanya, whether or not to start a chapter with vav. So this chapter starts with many chapters start with a vav. That they're a continuation of the previous chapter, yet another chapter. There's still a separate chapter. So here too, in addition and in light of what we discussed about the animal soul, a person's sense of self or reality, or even simply a person's self, not just his sense of self, is his self which he senses. So in addition to that, in a Jew, the nefesh hashenit b'Yisrael, in a Jew, we said, and he mentioned before, there are two souls. Immediately he started discussing the animal soul. In our categorization, we noted that the part of the animal soul that he's discussed up until now is the essence of the animal soul, etzem hanefesh habehemi. And then immediately he continues to the godly soul, which, as we'll see, and we've noted before, he won't just note this briefly, like you said, about the animal soul. He'll now go into 3 chapters of elaborating the godly soul. But the first sentence is the key, just like the previous short portion about the animal soul was a description of the essence of the animal soul. So the first portion of chapter 2 is also a description of the essence of the godly soul, which in the title here, just the first sentence, folds it all up. That second nefesh that I spoke about, that I mentioned, that the Jew ever has 2 neshamot, that the Alter Rebbe says. So the second neshama, Israel, which is only in a Jew, it's mamish, a part, a portion, a chelek. A chelek means like a piece of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of Hashem, of the essence of Hashem. Now, how am I supposed to understand that sentence? What does this mean? So we'll suggest 3 different reads, how to read this sentence. And once we say that, then Bichlal, maybe we'll say something a little bit general. The Bichlal, it's very important to know that anything can be read in several angles. Im panim la Torah, like the Alter Rebbe mentions in the footnote of the previous chapter, if you remember, there are 70 panim, 70 faces, or 70 angles that you can approach any topic, 70 true angles. There are several achoraim, several back ends, false angles to the Torah. You can obviously always just make things up that aren't true, but there are also 70 true ways. Obviously, those 70 angles, those are just archetypes. There are infinite angles. There are infinite things that can be said. Like the famous word, kepatish yefotzet sela, that the Torah is like a hammer smashing a rock. That numerous, infinite smithereens smash in any direction. Any portion of the Torah that you smash, that you knock your head against, it ricochets. Again, it multiplies. In order to metzamtzem, so that tzimtzum, to concentrate ourselves in a certain path, then we'll say again 3 archetype angles that can be read and should be read and need to be read in light of terminology that we're all familiar with, and understanding the yachas, like the relationship between each one of the parshanuyot. I heard from Rabbi Yitzchak once that actually I heard several times along these lines that the Rav said in different occasions, what's the uniqueness of our generation? what's in a sense, what's the Rav's Inyan? What's his Inyan? What's his Chidush in Torah? What's his Chidush Bichlal? So I heard, I don't remember, 4 or 5 different, maybe more, I don't remember right now. Each time, obviously, like the Rav is, every time he says something, it's new and different. So each time it was completely different. But one of the things I remember hearing the Rav saying that this is his Inyan is to to do what we call partsufim. Anybody's been to the Rav's classes a lot, you're familiar with the Rav's Torah. So this is obviously one of the Rav's traits, one of the Rav's inyanim, and it's a very general inyan to be able to take a multitude of angles on any topic, from physics to Kabbalah, and take a multitude of angles, which could even be seemingly contradicting angles, and put them together into a holistic. It's called in Kabbalah a partsuf, which means like a spectrum. A body, actually, what a partsuf really is like a living human being, which has different limbs and integrating processes simultaneously going on. You take a lot of seemingly contradicting or detached concepts and put them together. You expose the inner connections and parables between them, and connect them to a living process, so that you can see what might have been superficially seemed as a contradictory angle. You can see now that not only is it not contradicting, they complement each other and they complete each other, to the sense that if you study a topic this way correctly, in depth, then the conclusion you usually reach is that it's not understandable without all the angles. Not only do they not contradict each other, they not only do they complement each other, they depend on each other. They strive from each other. They cultivate each other. So a true partsuf, again, is like a living human being. That each limb is dependent on the other limbs. So it's a completely holistic creation reality. So everything in creation is that way, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu is that way. And the Torah is the most obviously and most apparently that way. Kol Torah Shmotav Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Chazal say that all the Torah is all the names of Hashem. It's all different, every word, every letter, every idea is all a different nickname referring to the same guy. It's all referring to the same guy. So everything is just Shmotav, angles and revelations of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So that being said, it's very important when you study. What we're going to do now is something along those lines. Again, this is a path that's unique for our generation. Very important that everybody is able to do this. I think we do this a lot. I mean, when we've studied, we've said, I don't know if every time we mention different angles and different words, I don't know if we take the time or the effort to put it together and come out with a partsuf. And again, there's numerous, infinite amounts of structures that you can do. So here, I think, is a very good position to, and I also feel that in the understanding of Tanya, I've seen that how you explain this sentence is very, very, very important, and how it projects on your understanding, your practical understanding, what the author wants to say. So again, when you say that, then what you could get is a seeming contradiction. So in order to explain it in a way that doesn't contradict and even cultivates each other, so we'll say 3 different perushim here, how this sentence can be read. And all 3 of these perushim, no, I don't think any of them I've made up, because it's all pshat or different pshats or from the Rebbes, the things that are written. But again, we want to note first, this is called, and the structure we'll want to parallel to is maybe one of the most basic structures we have is Hachna Avdalam Taka. And the way we want to study it, that itself is a type of Hachna Avdalam Taka. That, like we've said this many times, at first, we want to present now 3 or different interpretations of a sentence. So first we want to heighten the differences. You explain them well to see how each interpretation contradicts it, or seemingly contradicts. So when you explain something very well, you sharpen the edges, you pronounce the outlines very, very well. You don't leave any round edges. You make it a very sharp, precise explanation, then what happens is that you heighten differences. Because the better you explain each interpretation, the more well-defined it is. Therefore, it differs from the other well-defined interpretation. Now, we want well-defined interpretations. We want to understand things well and precisely and correctly. We don't want to leave things gray. If you say everything be'erech, so then you get like a superficial, false sense of inter-inclusion because nothing means anything. So everything works together. It's all like a gray mishmash. That's very bad to learn Torah that way. That any fleeting idea, you just kind of, it's not good. We want, again, we want to learn Torah like the Rebbe said many times. You should learn Chassidus like you learn Nigla. It's like when you're learning Nigla, you're learning halacha, and you have to paskin a halacha. In the end, you have to have very clear-cut conclusions. You can't understand things be'erech. You have to understand things b'diuk. You have to understand things precisely, not what's the word for be'erech? How do you say be'erech in English? I don't know.
Approximately.
Approximately, exactly. It's approximately that. It's approximately. Be'erech is better than approximately. Be'erech is like rounding off the edges. Not just ignoring the lack of precision, even purposely. So very often you get that type of study. Sometimes you hear the Torah, like again, it's called in Chassidut Koach HaMedameh. Koach HaMedameh is like the external layer of Bina. It's like your associated thought. You read an idea and you associate it to all kinds of other ideas and you build up a whole building, but there's no truth in it. There's no true, serious seeking of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's will, what Hashem is saying. So, in order to understand what's said, obviously you need a very real and mature and honest seeking of precision of what Hashem wants. There's an effort needs to be put into it. Therefore, when you explain any interpretation, what you want to do is you want to explain it well and you break your mind over it. And when that happens, then you heighten its outlines and inevitably you separate it from other interpretations. That's why very often you'll see different schools of thought in Judaism. It creates a certain machlokes. Each one's so convinced with his certainty of his understanding of the Torah that the other school of thought, in order for me to be right and to take my understanding seriously, it seems that I have to think you're wrong. That's seemingly a very reasonable conclusion, because usually when you don't feel that way, then you're just not taking it seriously enough. If you just say that, okay, I have an interpretation, but any interpretation could be good, then usually what that means is that your interpretation is just like approximately, maybe you could say it's all nothing. It's all a mishma. That we definitely don't want. So even though machlokes, there's something not so pleasant with machlokes or with contradicting each other, but the understanding definitely has to be a strong, good, precise, true understanding. Now, seemingly, the inevitable outcome of such profound study would be a machlokes. That if one understands one way and the other understands the other way, and each one of them is understanding it very well and seeking true conviction, so the seeming conclusion of that is that the other one's wrong. This process that I just mentioned, you see very often that amongst Jewish sects or Jewish strains of thought, Adrabah, the more serious each path is, usually the less tolerant it is of other paths, because again, that's like an inevitable result of taking your understanding very seriously. So it's a good thing to take your understanding seriously. It's called havdalah. Like this process is a process of havdalah, of separation. Really, it causes sometimes separation between people or between opinions. Again, when you sift your opinion very well, it's like a process of sifting. Havdalah is like sifting. So you also separate and even you separate yourself, like from a different interpreter. Again, when the Rav says that one of his inyanim is to re-include all of the seemingly different or even contradictory opinions, that's a vort of hamtaka. Obviously, all the vorts the Rav said. Every time I heard the Rav say what his inyan is, it was all a different way of saying sweetly, hamtaka. So that path we're going to walk down now, that itself is havdalah. First, we want to say different interpretations. We want to say each one so well that it contradicts the others. And after we do that, we want to, again, include them and see how not only do they not really contradict each other, they complement each other, they coexist, they depend on each other. And that itself is a sweetening. One second. Other than that, the three interpretations will say each one itself corresponds to achna avdalam. So we want to say them behavdalah, and each one is achna avdalam. We'll see that. Yeah, what was the question?
So two questions. When you mentioned koach hamidameh, I remember you speaking it before as some very negative thing. I'm not sure I know exactly what it means. It means literally the power to imagine. I mean, what is it exactly?
Imagination, the word for imagination, he was dimyon, which is very similar to koach hamidameh. Koach hamidameh is literally, I think the nearest term for that is like your associative trait, the power to associate, which is very similar to imagination in Hebrew. Dimayon, imagination is a process of unconscious or conscious process of imagination, where you again, imagination is like similarities, like your mind running with all kinds of similarities. You hear an idea and you associate it, then you escape with your imagination. So in Hebrew, the word dimayon and medameh are the same word. Now, I don't know if I said it's very bad. The most famous source for that is Rabbi Nachman. And Rabbi Nachman's writing, so this trait is the Yetzer Hara Mamash. He writes that explicitly several times. That this is the Satan, this is the Yetzer Hara, the Koach HaMedameh. In Chabad, again, I don't simply talking about the same trait. It's positioned as Chitzoniyut Bina. Just to put it in Kabbalistic terms, Medameh is the external layer of Bina, and like the exterior of your understanding, like a superficial process of associative thought. So the chitzoniyut of bina. Now this could very well be a very bad thing. That you just you allude to anything, and with very very weak connections build all kinds of conclusions.
Why did Rabbi Nachman think it was so bad? What about it is so possibly so bad?
He's very similar to the phrase ruach shtut, like Chazal say, she'en adam over avera ela ken nichnas lo ruach shtut. What's a ruach shtut? A spirit of folly. What's the meaning of spirit of folly? That you don't think processes through. That if you, like the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya also, that if you were to think it through, that in this deed that you're doing, you're severing your connection with Hashem, then you wouldn't do it. And any avera you do is only because you allow yourself to not think it through. If someone would come up to you with a statue and say, "Here, leave HaKadosh Baruch Hu and serve this avodah zarah," you wouldn't do it. But in mundane deeds, like small averot per se, then you don't notice, or you don't allow yourself to notice. You don't. Worse than that, you even allow yourself not to notice. You cultivate partial processes of thought, which allow you to kind of reach all kinds of points you wouldn't walk to directly. Then you find yourself in all sorts of, why did I do that? Why did I say that? You find yourself in all sorts of situations which are like a seeming result of a lack of thought. That's what Chazal say, that bemet every avera that a Jew does is stemming from such a state of mind. And if a Jew would think it through entirely, then you'd never sin, because if you'd see how every little tiny sin is severing you from Hashem, if you'd feel the existential disconnection from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, like simple, if you do something, you wrong someone, forget it. You never. It's not that you want to step on his face. You just don't think it through. You ignore. You're not sensitive enough. But you allow yourself to behave that way. To live in such a lack of sensitivity. So that's called the ruach shtut. It's very similar to the term koach medameh. Koach medameh again is a superficial associative thought, like an associative train of thought, but superficially, not a profound, not a true train of thought, like a tzaddik or a navi, a prophet. So it says in Chassidut that a prophet is one who's refined his koach medameh. That he in all of prophecy is like associative thought. You see something, you see makel shaked ani roeh, you see a branch of an almond tree. What does that mean? Okay, so the Navi, the prophet, is one who he associates it correctly. Chamadif mi Navi. A wise man is even better than a prophet because he sees it in reality. He sees what's going to come of things. Like he makes the connections correctly. Now all of us are like that. So just the average guy, if you're driving down the street listening to the radio and your associative thought is hearing all kind of prophecies, then you're crazy. Probably it's probably not me'achus. That's yetzer hara. That's like what Rabbi Nachman says. But this trait, when refined, can be a very, very profound holy thing. So the yetzer hara that Rabbi Nachman is talking about is the superficial, unrectified koach medameh.
And it makes me think of, like, in psychoanalysis, they have the power of association.
Obviously, that's a classic example. That this is the biggest problem with psychoanalysis, that a person walks in and the psychologist is so, pardon me, but he's so full of psychosis that he immediately projects all of his neurosis and psychosis on this person and concocts what he calls a diagnosis, which again is nothing but a reflection of his own warpings. Like you see, this is mamash, this every day. This is every day you see this, and that's it. And now he lives with that delusion, and he's treating this person with that's ridiculous. So again, this is a topic in of itself, so we're not going to run with it.
Okay.
For sure, that is a classic example for how koach hamedameh can be, like Rabbi Nachman says, the biggest yetzer hara. This is the yetzer hara. Again, it's the spirit of folly that's enabling all the warpings of life. But again, that trait, like in Chabad, you won't find such a fierce categorization that the medameh is the yetzer hara. That's not a sentence you'll see in Chabad. Rabbi Nachman, it's much explicit that way. So you need to understand.
Just one other very short question. You mentioned the havdalahs, the sifting, and the hamtakah is bringing things back together. But I didn't hear what you said for hachna'ah. Did you say what hachna'ah was in this introduction?
Yeah, so let's say in light of what we discussed, so hachna'ah is just subduing your initial superficial associative understanding. You read a text, like in context of what we want to start studying now. You read a text. This is Bemet what we're gonna explain now.
Okay.
Very important what we're saying now. There's a klal gadol, like a major rule in studying Torah, and especially Chassidut, and especially Chabad, and most precisely the Alter Rebbe. Mamash. You study, you read a sentence. 100% what you understood is 180 degrees from the truth. 100%. You can be certain about that. Why? Because again, as I'll explain in Tanya, You are an animal soul. So first you understand everything upside down. Olamot bepshitut ve'elokut b'itchadshut. Your own reality is the axiomatic truth, and the kedusha, Kodesh Baruch Hu, is a chiddush for you. So that's 180 degrees wrong. But that's the basis of your experience of life. So if I read a sentence, the first thing I need to do is flip the meaning completely, 180 degrees. Now, in order to do that, I need to do something even earlier, before the first thing. I need to know that the first thing I need to do is flip it. Now, in order to do that, I need to do something even preceding the first thing. And that is to not flow with my first. First, I need to again, to machnia, to subdue my initial tendency to like that psychologist you said. How do you help? What do you do to help? I just said a sentence before. All psychologists are just spilling their own psychosis on someone. Okay, so let's say some psychologist is hearing our class, and he's an MS Dikayid, and he hears that, and immediately he thinks, "Nachon, you're right, 100%. So what do I do? What should I do with that? It's like inherent. What can I? It's not by choice. That we're not suggesting chas v'shalom that psychologists are evil. They're not. There's no. That we're not discussing. If there's someone who's out to harm people, we're not discussing that at all. I'm not talking about bad people. I'm talking about good people. Good psychologists want to help. They do the worst things. Why? Because not they don't chas v'shalom mean to. It's just inherent. So let's say someone hears you and he says, "Nachon emes, that's true. What do I do now?" So the first thing you need to do is hachna'a. You need to first stop your inherent tendency. That's why chash, hachna'a means again to be silent, to silent your first tendencies. So if we say the first thing to do is to flip, then before flipping, first there's stopping. Before you do a somersault, you first stop. You're walking in one direction. You want to walk in the other direction. The first thing you need to do is walk backwards. Okay, then really the first thing you need to do is first you need to stop. Then you turn around. That's called hachna'a. I mean, these are topics that we're familiar with.
Yes. Okay.
I say this. So that's the complement. The hachna'a, the lamtaka. Now we'll say it here in this first in chapter 2 in Tanya. When I read I'll ask a question. What's probably, usually, what's the most common angle of reading Tanya? Hachna'a, Havdalah, or Hamdalah? Like if you open most of the books in Chabad, what will they probably be tending to? So probably they'll be tending to Havdalah, because all of Chabad is Havdalah. So if you read this sentence, what does this mean? How do I understand this first sentence? So what's the classic interpretation? Anybody opens any class, any book of Tanya, how would you understand it? Now, again, we're about to bash it. Why? Because what will we say? That Havdalah is very often Havdalah without Hachna'a. And then it's a misunderstanding. You're not understanding your own Havdalah. So very often the interpretation here is that Nefesh Hashanit B'Yisrael, the Jew's other soul, is a part of God. So just like you're an animal soul, you're also a part of Hashem. But that's mamash. It's written here literally, so it's very hard to argue with that. That's mamash the literal meaning, right? It's important to notice that every interpretation we say is mamash the literal meaning. So much so that everything else is wrong. But what happens if I just say that? Very often, if I just think that way, then just like when I spoke about my animal soul, Then I read that the Alter Rebbe says that I'm all bad, I'm all evil. And when I said I'm this, I'm that, then the I discussed was correct because he's talking about my animal soul and I'm thinking about myself. That was true about the animal soul. But when he says that the second soul is a piece of Hashem, and I understand that just like I'm all the bad things we said before, I'm also very holy. I'm still associating with the still I, same I. I haven't changed my point of view. I'm still associating with the same sense of self. That's who I am. Well, first of all, that I'm making a mess of everything because the same guy a second ago I called very bad, now I'm calling very good. So it's very perplexing. So am I good or am I bad? That's not what he's saying here at all. He's not saying, he's saying the opposite. He's saying that there are two eyes, not that the same eye has two tendencies. I mean, that's what we explained in length in the previous chapter. The whole vort here is that it's not two tendencies of one soul. It's two different eyes. So reading that way initially can very easily slip into a complete misunderstanding of this. You take the same eye and just now you call it good. You're not turning darkness into light. You're just calling darkness light. Before you called it dark, now you call it light. I'm bad, now I'm holy. So if I just read that way, that's not so good. You don't want to start reading that way. So what would be the first read in Tanya? What's this? Yeah, everything's pshat. What's the first pshat? The first pshat is that it says that in the previous chapter, he said that the animal soul is you. And in chapter 2, he says, V'nefesh hashanit b'Yisrael, the second soul isn't you, it's part of Hashem. Simple pshat. The nefesh hashanit b'Yisrael, the second soul, is not part of you. It's part of Hashem. That's what he wants to say. Again, it's a literal pshat. Read the sentence. The second soul in Israel is part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu mamish. It's mamish, not part of you. That's a pshat in Tanya. It's the exact opposite, seemingly, of the more familiar pshat. He's saying that you are mamash part of Hashem. So here we're saying the opposite. That your godly soul is mamash, not part of you. Say that? Different ways of reading the sentence. Literally reading the sentence.
So that's the first pshat you're saying.
That's the or that's the first pshat. That's the right way to put. You should put this. I suggest that you want to understand correctly. First, you need to understand this way. Then you can understand that way, and then you can also sweeten. What's the sweetening? What's the third reading here? The third reading here is that this guy, again, it has to be third. If you say it first, it's completely warped.
Wait, so the second is, I just want to make sure I get the first two right. The first one is there's two eyes. It's not just one eye, there's two eyes. Is that the first?
Yes, the first one is that you are your animal soul. So that there's a piece of God in you is not part of you, it's part of Hashem. It's not you.
Isn't you,
Your
it's part of Hashem.
Second soul is not you, it's Hashem.
That's the first interpretation.
That's the first interpretation.
It's mamish, not part of you.
No, the second interpretation is that what it is mamish Hashem. Eloka mamish. And the third interpretation is that soul is completely mamished. It's legamre actualized within you. And these are three interpretations that are written in Chassidus.
Is actual, does that mean actualized within you?
This is what the Frierdiker Rebbe says. The Frierdiker Rebbe says that the content of the words mimal, the mamash, these two words are opposite. That's not the pshat. That's not the pshat. That's not the second interpretation. The second interpretation is that the word mamish means completely. like entirely. So if I say that something is exalted, and if I say it's entirely exalted, then that makes it more exalted. It's not the opposite. And being in something or being entirely something is not the opposite. It's the same thing. It's more of the same. This is all literal readings here. If I say that your godly soul is not you, or if I say your godly soul is Hashem, those are the first interpretations, 1 and 2, right?
Okay.
Now, what does the word mamish add? It adds that into the first interpretation, it adds that it's entirely not you. In the second interpretation, it adds that it's entirely Hashem.
Okay.
More of the same. It's just like making the point stronger. But the Frierdiker Rebbe, he says the opposite. He says that the word mamash is the opposite of the word mimal. It's the opposite of being exalted. Simply, I understood that the word mamash is just stressing how exalted are you, entirely exalted. The Frierdiker Rebbe says, no, really, the word mamash, the word for entirely in Hebrew, mamash, is also the word for mamashi. Mamashi means tangible, tangibilized, something tangible, something that you can feel, something that's not exalted. That's what it means. Mamash. Mamash means to be tangible. So the content of exalted, mal, and the content of mamash is the opposite. Exaltance is something aloof, and mamash is something tangible. Yeah, it's just another way of reading the sentence, because you could.
I understand. But what does it mean? It's actualized within you. What does that mean, actualized within
As
you?
much as this godly soul is not you and entirely the essence of Hashem, it's completely actualized in your natural material reality. Present in your body, in your gashmias completely. So that's like the opposite of both interpretations, because that's saying that it's mamish not exaltant, and that it's mamish you. Yeah, that's a sweet thing.
And the idea that there's two yous, two eyes, whatever, two yous, that's part of the first interpretation?
No, the first interpretation is how, again, each one of these interpretations is correct, and each one of them therefore is correlated with the general understanding of having two souls. But still, how do I relate to these two souls? So the first interpretation is suggesting that you have two souls, but only one of them is you. Is mamish you. When you say I, when you refer to yourself, then you're identifying with only one of your souls. The godly soul, it's not you. What does it mean that you have it? It's a question, but it seems very aloof. Again, experientially, this is not so difficult to imagine. This is seemingly the most experiential interpretation of two souls. Right? Okay, the second interpretation is saying the same thing from the other side. The godly soul is entirely HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And again, maybe what are the two phrases to connect the first and second interpretation? So that's called reality and essence, metziut v'mahut. Like an example, we say very often, if you have a PTA meeting, the teacher calls you in and he says, your son Moishi, really be'emes, he's a very good boy. So what does that mean when the teacher says that? That be'emes, he's a very good boy. Usually it means that he's a horrible child. During the class apart. But be'emes, really, he's a wonderful child.
That's the mahut? That's the mahus?
In his essence, he's a very good boy. Someone says that, what it means is that his reality is 180 degrees from that. Usually that's what a person's meaning. So if you go into a PTA meeting, the first thing you hear is that essentially your child is very sweet. Then you know you're in for a bashing. Same thing here. The first interpretation is a very realistic, experiential understand. That's why it's very important to start with reality. You need to be realistic.
So that's
Achna'ah,
the Metzias. The first one is the Metzias.
achna'ah is mitzias. Achna'ah is like nafshi ka'afar lakol tiyeh, being like the earth, having 2 feet on earth. That's called achna'ah. Just being, you wake up and smell reality. Don't be delusional. That's achna'ah. So what is achna'ah? Achna'ah is that my godly soul is entirely not me. Where does he say this in Tanya explicitly? He says it in chapter 29, the chapter of Hachna'ah, of Bitush. There he says it 3 times in one page. One page, in the first page of chapter 29, 3 times the Alter Rebbe says that your animal soul is you and your godly soul is not you. 3 times he says that. Hi Adam atzmo. And the godly soul is neshama shenatata bi. Like every morning we say, that there's a soul that you gave me. It's not me. Me is my animal soul. So this is an angle of Hachna'ah. Very important, like we said in the beginning, you have to start from Hachna'ah. If you don't start from Hachna'ah, then your latter interpretations end up being something completely warped. Because you're taking your superficial associative thought and you're tagging onto it all kinds of delusional interpretations. So you're calling yourself holy. First, you need to realize what yourself is and put it aside. After you do that, then it's true that within Adrash, even in chapter 29, the Alter Rebbe doesn't say that you don't have a godly soul. He just says that soul, that piece of Hashem, is something that Hashem puts in me. It's not me. It's something given to me. But it's given, not that it's not given. Now it's given so much that I can even identify with it. I can completely forget myself to the presence of Hashem within myself so much that becomes me. It's like sweetening. So again, so the first interpretation, I guess, is all reading Pshat, is that what the Alter Rebbe says here is that Nefesh Hashanit B'Yisrael, it's part of Hashem, not part of you. He's also saying that that godly soul is mamish, a part of Hashem. So mamish, the essence of Hashem in you, a part of Hashem. And also that part of Hashem, it's in you, mamish. Mamish in you. It's mamumash. It's actualized completely. That's already sweet. These are 3 literal readings of a sentence. And they're all true. They're all correct completely. But you have to, it's like a process of thought. It's the easiest way of explaining it. You have to go through the stages to understand them correctly.
How is the second one, Havdalah? How is it's Mamish Hashem? How is that Havdalah?
Havdalah is it's completely stepping out of yourself, and you're part of Hashem. Everything you see, all his reality, all of his averot, that's nothing. It's garnished. It's like dust, like the Rebbe would say. But really, a Jew is a diamond. True essence here is it's a diamond. That's what it is. You're completely separating between reality and essence. So you're also stepping out of your reality. You're ignoring your reality completely. You're separating yourself from yourself and identifying with something completely aloof, completely exalted. That's Havdalah. Now, reimbursing that exaltance into your natural reality, that would be sweetening. That's what the Frierdiker Rebbe says. Mamash. That mamash really is the opposite of exaltance. Mamash means the actual. Now, why is it so? We can say many words why it's so important, but what I think is one of the most important conclusions here, again, in continuation of how we've been studying up until now, is that the first thing you want to do, if you don't understand all 3 interpretations, or more precisely, if you don't start with Hachna'ah, like if the average person opens a Perush on Tanya, or just open Tanya, it says that you're a godly soul. What's the natural tendency again? Exactly the opposite of what the Alter Rebbe wants. The exact opposite of what we explained in the previous chapter. The natural tendency is that I immediately associate the godly soul with my Yeshus. my ego, my sense of self. Now,
Mm.
let's say I read the previous chapter. So there's a contradiction here. A second ago I was bad, now I'm good. So usually what a person does in his intellect, in order to kind of to work through that contradiction, and this is called koach hamedameh that Rabbi Nachman bashes so much. You're doing like half thoughts, all kinds of. Again, you're not being precise. What would your conclusion then be? The grob, the previous chapter, the animal soul, those are my coarse grob layers, my spirituality, my all of my highs, my senses of high, that's my godliness. You'll try to make like you associate that with one part of your yeshus, and you associate godliness with a different part of your yeshus. And that's once you understood that way in the beginning of Tanya, you can close the book. You'll rape it from chapter 1 to chapter 53. That's it. That's the entire 180 degrees from the Alter Rebbe is saying. And that's it. And you'll keep studying that way. And you'll keep flowing with that misconception. This is what Rabbi Nachman meant. This is mamash spirit of fall. That there's that you misunderstood. And therefore there's a little bit of a contradiction. So you kind of circled the angles and worked around it and came to conclusions. And maybe you even taught it for 20 years that way. And now you're so convinced that you've convinced many others. And there's a whole parade agreeing to you. And that's it. Now you can walk with it. Yeah, so if I'm phrasing this very, very severely. I don't know if I think it's so severe. This is all just to justify why Rabbi Nachman says that the koach hamedameh is the Yetzer Hara mamish. This is the Satan himself. So it could be very bad. So it's very important to start with hachna'ah. And then after there's hachna'ah, then you're really capable of sensing that there's something in me that's not part of myself. The animal soul doesn't describe the entirety of who I am. I'm not shalem. I'm not whole with that idea. There's an inkling of Hashem. And then you can also believe in the Frierdiker Rebbe's interpretation. And that inkling of Hashem can actualize and manifest so strongly that it becomes yourself. Be'ezrat Hashem. That's mamash hamtaka. But if you don't first separate and identify what we're discussing, then there's no amtaka, and there's no achna, and there's no avdala. It's all just a mishmash of words, and you haven't studied anything. So what's really written here? All three are really written there. It means all three. Just you need to be able to position each one correctly. So if someone comes around and says that the Alter Rebbe said that the godly soul is entirely not you, that's true. The Alter Rebbe did say that. If someone else says that no, the Alter Rebbe says that a Jew is entirely a piece of Hashem. Okay, for sure that's written here. This is what usually people call the pshat. I agree. And like I said, saying that in Tanya and Chabad, the relatively havdalah interpretation is really the most reasonable one. It's a reasonable interpretation. It doesn't mean you can't warp it. You can misunderstand the most correct interpretation very easily. So this is again 3 ways to read a sentence, and I think with all of the introductions we've had and the background we have, it's very easy to understand where each one goes and how they're all correct and they don't contradict, or it's just okay. That's called understanding. That you need to again, if you understand superficially, so every multitude of angles becomes a contradiction. It's not a contradiction. It's just an elaborate topic. That's all. It's also not so elaborate. It's not so elaborate. You said 3 interpretations of a word. It's not so complicated. But this is like the bare minimum of anything that can be considered study. So in association with this sentence here, these are 3 nice words, and they position like a good spectrum of how to read through this. And all are true. So that's it for today, and Hashem, with that as an introduction, next week we'll be able to start moving with the content of the chapter. Hashem.